So for the next 20 minutes or give or take, I'm going to be talking about other ways that we can support our students. This is talking a little bit more about what to do with them when they, let's say, don't have homework, or how to increase conversation and have a deeper, better mentoring relationship with our students, especially our teens who are in middle school and high school. So this is the agenda that we're going to go over the next 20 minutes. We have our introduction, checking on if they have homework, how that works, what to look for. I'm going to introduce a educational theory called scaffolding. I'm going to talk about extra resources, and then I'm going to leave you about 5-ish minutes to ask me any questions. So that's what we're going to do in this little bit. So first off is StudentVue. StudentVue, as many of you are aware of, is the educational technology platform that Arlington County uses for their students. It is how the students can track their grades, get in contact with their teachers, and look at all of the different assignments that they've been assigned throughout this quarter. It's important to note that we just started third quarter, so many of them may not have a lot of assignments, though it's very telling that I was speaking to some students yesterday at a certain site, and I was like, oh yeah, I passed science, but I had 37 missing assignments. It's like, one, I don't even know how that's possible, but 37 seems like a lot. And then he was able to go into StudentVue and show me immediately. So the majority of students all have StudentVue on their phones. It's actually one of the ways that we do exit checks at certain sites. Like before we gave out some of the sites their Christmas bags, you had to tell us about your grades. And a lot of kids were like, let me look, because I don't know. I have a B in biology, or I have a C in math. And I was like, okay. So the picture on the right is a screenshot of a YouTube video that talks about how to go through StudentVue. So you'll see the number and the class and the grade, and then the teacher with the email is in the same line with the class that the student is in. So in the same column as the letter grade, so if you look down at the third B, to the right there it says one missing assignment. So what you can do in that instance is click on it. It's not an active link in this moment because it's a screenshot of a video, but for most students, when they're in StudentVue, it will be a live link that you can go to and see. So it's great to start asking, like, okay, especially if they have multiple missing assignments, which assignment do you want to start working on? Some of them may say, oh, it's marked as missing, but it's because the teacher hasn't graded it yet, or it's a group project and I can't do it by myself. It's like, okay, one of the things that you can do in those instances is say, okay, let's discuss and write down the steps that you need to take to accomplish this, or what do you need to prepare for this so you have it ready when that happens. Start thinking of future casting, thinking about ways that we can support them through this process. And you all will be sent this presentation. So the reason I've included these links is these are videos from Arlington County about how to use StudentVue and also Canvas. Canvas is also the website in which they track their homework on. So it's one of the things, like a lot of, especially our middle schools, come say, oh, we don't have homework. It's like, okay, let me see StudentVue. Do you have any missing assignments that you should be working on if you don't have homework? And then making sure that they focus on their academics when they can. I think that's a big part of what we're working on because so many kids have so many missing assignments. And then We're not there yet. Before I move on to the next section, does anyone have any other questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me, Sarah?
Yes, Stephen, go ahead.
Thanks. So I was just wondering if there's often a time limit as to when they can do these assignments that they've missed.
That depends. It's going to depend a little bit on the teacher and a little bit on the time of year. So, for example, we just started the third quarter. So I asked a kid to look at their StudentVue, and he was like, "Oh, here's all my missing assignments, but I can't do any of them because they were assigned in second quarter, and there's been a strict cutoff for grades." And so it's like, okay, look at this quarter, what you can affect. And some teachers are more lenient and will say, "Oh, you can turn this in late and it's okay." And it also sometimes depend on the type of assignment. You may have seen that some of the assignments are like educational games. So they're using a lot of gamification. So they're on StudentVue and you see like a quiz and a little guy then like jumps around. That's very common for the middle schoolers. Less common for the high schoolers, I would say. So that depends on your age group. So they can go in and do those assignments immediately. And a lot of times they can do them within a window of how late they are. But it's going to depend on the teacher. And that's one of the things, if they have a missing assignment that is very late, but it is something that they can do, I would suggest that if it's past the due date, you could help them write an email to the teacher and say, "Hey, I noticed that this is a missing assignment. I know that it's late. Could I turn it in for partial credit?" And see, start working with them to develop those skills and responsibility. Be like, "Hey, I know that I did it. I didn't do it. I take responsibility for it. But if I do it now, can I get partial credit?" Because especially for some of our kids, sometimes a 50% is better than a zero in statistics. So working on things like that, it's very dependent.
All
I don't
righty.
know if that helps, Stephen.
Yeah, that helps a
Okay.
lot. Thanks.
No, you're welcome. Any other questions before I move on?
Not a question, just a
Yes.
comment to sort of reinforce what you said, Sarah. I do a lot of encouraging them to talk to the teacher
Mm-hmm.
in the case of missing assignments. Because sometimes they say, as you mentioned, "Oh, I turned that in already." Okay, you need to talk to your teacher then and make sure that it gets
Mm-hmm.
graded. Or, um, well, I think it might be too late to do that. Well, find out. Yeah, you need to
Ask.
ask. Or sometimes too, it's like, well, I didn't understand or I lost it or like that you need to talk to your
Mm-hmm.
teacher.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think one of the great things about StudentVue, and let me actually go back. Hold on. It's zoom back and not, there it is. Um, you can actually see to the right of the name of the teacher is a little email icon. So directly from StudentVue, the students can email their teachers. And so I would encourage you all to work with students in those cases where it's like, and I hear you, Marna. You could probably tell your students all the time, talk to your teachers, talk to your teachers, talk to your teachers. And it's probably in one ear and out the other once they leave program. But it might be something to consider being like, okay, why don't I help you draft an email to your teacher? We can send a note right now. And then also having them practice writing in a semi-professional environment can be very helpful, especially for high schoolers. It's like make sure you use full sentences and are respectful. So it is something we can, connect to some of our social emotional learning and help them develop other skills as well. But emailing the teacher is always an option.
Can I add something to that, Sarah?
Yes, Miss Narma,
I
please.
I work at Harvey Hall, and probably all the staff they got their student view information. Talk to the staff.
Mhm.
They have the students at least at Harvey Hall. They need to share this credentials so we can check. If the kids give you a hard time to log in or show you the grades or whatever, you can always talk to the staff, and probably they had the credential for the student view. At
That's a
least I
good
got
point,
it
Miss
all.
Norma.
We do.
That's a good point, Miss Norma, because they'll be like, "Oh, I lost my password." Be like, let's try that again. It's like we are all young at heart, but we're not that naive. Nice try. Because they will always try to pull one over on you. So I'm going to go into a little bit of educational theory just because, well, one, I'm a little bit of a nerd about it and love to talk about it, but also I think it's important for you all to learn a little bit about the process of learning in the adolescent age and how we can help support that. So scaffolding sounds like a big, scary word. It actually isn't. So scaffolding, similar to the picture on the left, is usually the structure you put up on the side of a building when you're rebuilding it, that you're trying to do things little by little. But scaffolding in the terms of education and education theory is all about building confidence and strengthening understanding. So it's kind of like building a brick wall. You set the base and you can do more and more and more and reach higher levels as you go, but you have to have the external support, that scaffolding, to help you do it. So Vygotsky, very hard last name, was actually the person who came up with the idea of scaffolding. And one of the things that is critical to his theory is this zone of proximal development. So there's the level of what you can do independently, what you can do with some help. That's the zone of proximal development. And that's really as tutors where you guys are working. You're helping them with the processes as they are learning to make sure that they can eventually do it on their own. Because a lot of times when you first try to do something, it's beyond your reach. It's just something you cannot do it even with support. You're like, it's like asking a middle schooler to be like, okay, let's start doing some calculus. And you're like, oh no, this isn't going to work. We need some more help, some more structure. I also really liked this graphic to explain it because the students off by themselves on the left on the blue section, they know what they know, right? So this is the zone of proximal development. You are there, the tutor, the mentor. You are helping them, showing them what to do. You most likely are modeling. You do it in front of them so they can see what they're doing. And then they follow you up the stairs. And then the third section, you're explaining it. You're going through the processes so that they can intellectually understand it, not just see how it's done. So that when they get to the fourth section, what is not known, you'll see if the steps are bigger. You can't get up them. Well, it's too difficult, but at least they understand the process of what is a system of stairs in this example, so that they can learn, so that they can keep going in the processes, so that they can have more knowledge and keep moving forward. So I want to push you all to think about, in terms of scaffolding, here are some phrases that you all can use to help you when you're working with teams. What if I show you how to do a problem, then we work on this together? This may be a little bit more common for math things, where there's usually a specific answer, but you can also, if you were doing a more like literacy based, be like, do you want me to tell you how I would start this? Or, you can always ask them, can you show me how you would start this problem? Or what do you think is the first step? If you do the first step, I'll do the second step. Things like that, going back and forth and reiterating and going so that they can continue to learn and grow. And it's also very important to remind them that this is a learning process, and learning is difficult. There's also a lot of emotions attached to learning, because a lot of times when we're learning, if we don't get it right, it's labeled as wrong. And even saying the word wrong can have a very visceral emotion because it can feel like failure. And when you have failure, that leading into the next emotion, which can be shame, and people do not react well when there's shame or this feeling that I didn't do it right. So reminding students consistently, you're doing great. Learning is hard. It can be frustrating. Validating those feelings and understandings. And also reminding them, so it's very easy to be blind in our own lives. So it's like, you see this a lot with, especially like my niece and nephew. I don't see them every day or every week, every month. So like when I do see them, it's like, oh my God, they're so big. They've learned this. But sometimes when you're there every day and you see those incremental changes, you don't even think about it. And that's from, an adult seeing someone else's development. But even my own development, I was like, oh, yeah, because it's not a light switch. Growing, learning, development, all of that is a continuum. It's a process. And it's very sometimes hard to delineate those benchmarks and those big moments when those, because all of the things is, we celebrate graduations and big things, but throughout the year, there's always those little moments to celebrate. So reminding them, you've gotten so much better, faster at this, stronger at this since last month. And one of the things that is important is the since last month, or putting a time constraint on it so that they can think back and reflect. It's like, oh yeah. It's like, do you remember in first quarter when you couldn't solve this type of equation? And now you're getting them right most of the time. You're doing so good. Or I remember when I first started working with you, your English writing wasn't so fluid, but now when I read it, I'm so impressed. That can be really helpful. And another part of scaffolding is like, have you tried this? I can show you how to do it. Or even how you try can sometimes, depending on your student, and you'll be able to gauge the student that you're working with best, but also their emotions and how they react to things. Have you tried this? Or even just being a more general, like, what have you tried? To see their process and then see how else we can add to it can be really powerful. And connecting to this idea of scaffolding, it's like we are supporting their learning, and it's a process. And it's not a really fun process, as we can all think back to, learning something new. It's always usually pretty difficult and sometimes not so much fun. Okay. Do we have any questions before I move on to the next thing? So I'm going on to probably everyone's thing. They're like, but what do we do when they don't have homework? They don't have missing assignments. What can we do with them? We still want to do something maybe a little bit educational. I'm going to give you guys a website. Again, you will get this presentation, so you will have this written down, but it's a pretty easy thing to remember. freerice.com. I personally like them. My background is in international development. And so this works with the United Nations World Food Program. And so for every question you get right, you do 10 grains of rice to the World Food Program, and it gives food to communities around the world that are in crisis. So they started off as a English vocab quiz to help with like SAT words. So you try to find the most similar word. So invigorate, is it holler, is it energize, is it smack, is it rip? And so they'll click on it and it will turn green if they got it right, red if they got it wrong. And so one of the things you can say is like, okay, why don't you do 200 right? When you get to 200 grains of rice, we'll play a game. Or 300, depending on the student, and this is the fun part, the subject matter. Because you can switch the level. Oh, I didn't do it here, but on the website, I didn't take the screenshot as large, but above global statistics and to the left, you'll see 3 lines. And the 3 lines, it will come down with a menu, and you can click category and level. So the first thing you can choose is the level. You can make it harder. So you can make English harder, you can make math harder, you can make Spanish harder. Because, fun things, in the math section, they got multiplication, pre-algebra, geometry, and derivatives. They also have science. They have languages. There's a couple of different categories so the student can kind of choose what they want to work on. It's like, do you want to work on some English language? Do you want to work on math? Do you want to work on science? Some of the science stuff, I will say, unless it's a little broader, so it might take some working through, but this is an option of something a little bit educational that the kids can work on, especially languages, if they're working on languages. And so I'm also going to talk through some verbal activities and like talking to games that you can do with kids. So these are things that I imagine you doing a little bit more one-on-one, or maybe one volunteer to like 2 or 3 kids. And the thing is, it would one person for tell me about a time when is each person is going to pick a category, and then each person has to respond quickly about a time when. And you can start off light and fluffy. I'm not saying start very deep and heavy, like tell me about a time you failed. That's going to be very jarring. It's like, okay, like tell me about a time when you were hungry. Tell me about a time. You can bring in like different emotions, or tell me about a time you tripped. And it's going to, connect, but also allow the kids to talk to you and have stories and different things. But it's also fun for the kids, and can be, because they get to ask you also the same thing. It's like, okay, I'll tell you about a time I tripped. And they might propose a question for you about a time that you have no idea. And you're like, or hadn't thought about. So it's one that also gets the brain moving. Writing a letter to future me. So I always love proposing the question to kids. It's like, okay, 5 years from now is probably not the best thing to say to middle school or high schools, because it's such a big life change. Because if you're talking to a junior, they're going to be a sophomore in college. And sometimes it just doesn't compute. Like, okay, in 2 months, where do you think you're going to be at? What's life going to be like? Start with smaller increments. If they actually want to physically write the letter, great. If not, it could be something that you talk through. That's an option. So I don't know if you all have done like build a story. So this is one where usually I'll have a piece of paper. If you're doing cards, I would usually do 4 categories for the suits. So the clubs, the spades, hearts, and diamonds. And then of course the dice is 6 sides, so you have 6 things. And so you would choose like, okay, what's going to happen to this person? Something serious, something silly, something water related. Like you could choose your categories based on how funny or you're feeling. And then if you're using cards, for example, it would be something like war. You would split the deck into 2. You would start over and say, in this example, let's say I have a diamond. Tell me something silly. It's like, Bob, I'm not in a silly mood right now, so my example's not working. Let's see. Or magical. Okay, I'm gonna do magical for my example. Bob walked out of his house and found a gnome. Okay. Kid flipped something over, something serious. The gnome was very angry and started yelling. And you can just see how this thing snowballs into craziness. It doesn't have to make any sense. It's just a story. You go back and forth trading different actions that happen to a certain person or in the story to see where their mind goes. It can be, again, it's a lot of creativity. Drawing my dream life, working. It's like, okay, think of some little things, some big things, middle of the road things. What do you want? What do you want next year? Again, don't talk too far in advance because it's gonna lose some connection. What do you want next year to look like? Especially for like our 7th, 8th graders who are getting closer to high school. Talking to an 8th grader and be like, okay, what do you want? What do you want your life to be like? What do you want everything to be like next year when you're in high school? When you have all these options? What do you want to play on a sports team? Do you want to have better grades? Okay, what do you want to go on vacation with your family? Okay, what are things that interest you so you can use those to connect back with them on an emotional level to other things? Because it's always the stronger emotional connection that they have with you, the more that they're going to open up and tell you things about how we can help them and help motivate them and what they find important. Because that's going to change all the time with every kid. Like that's, every child's their unique person, very different. Also, the alphabet memory game. It sounds very simple. A, apple, B, banana, C, carrot, D. If you're growing healthy foods, I stop at D because my mind always goes to donut. But seeing if you can do it, certain kids are very motivated by like, oh, how fast can we do this? Gotta go back and forth. Or, you have to repeat what the person behind you said. So it's like A, apple, B, banana, C, carrot, D, donut, E, eggplant, F, fig, G, grapefruit. Like, and by the time you get up to T, you're like, what did we say? And you go back and forth and back and forth. And these are like quick little things that you can do with very little to no resources. Like some of them you might need a deck of cards or a pen. But again, these are to promote conversation and to have activities that you can do with them that get them talking to you about, even if it's about a gnome who rides a unicorn into a rainbow and falls into a swimming pool. Okay, you've made a crazy story, but you can kind of get to know them and see what they're like, what there's going on. For those of you who've worked with some of your students for years, it can just be a little bit something different. I know that there's always card games and little things that kids can do, but more of the things that you can do with them so that they have connections with you, so they feel comfortable asking you questions, I think is really important. I was talking with some students the other week. I was like, okay, we were talking about budgeting, and it was a really great, lesson that we had planned, and we talked about different things. And I asked them at the end, it's like, okay, so who are you going to talk to if you ever have questions about budgeting and money? And they're like, my school counselor was the first thing they said. And I looked, I was like, are you actually going to go to your school counselor? And they're like, no. But that's the answer you want to hear. It's like, no, that wasn't the question I asked. I want to know who you'd actually go to. They're like, friends, maybe, but they don't know. I don't know who to ask. It's like, you do realize we have 2 volunteers right there that you could ask and they would tell you. And they were like, oh yeah. So sometimes thinking about ways that you can connect with them and have them see you as a resource for maybe things that aren't just homework. It's like asking about, their friends. It's like things like that can be very powerful.